Okay, hi everyone again. We are back with this cottage that we made. Well, I just made it. You maybe watched it. If you haven't watched that yet, you should probably watch those videos first. Or if all you want to know is a little bit about how I do some shading on items like this is the video for you. So I've placed this on a new file just to make things a bit smoother. I've also added Louise in there for scale, and first thing I'm going to do is use one of my actions that I've made. It's super simple. It's just saving me work that I do over and over again, which is when I want to come and shade something, I make these group of layers to put it on top because the way we do things, they end up changing the colors underneath. So I can't do regular shading, which would be to sort of blend and mix colors in altogether that are appropriate for the color scheme that you're using, because we're using multiple different color schemes, then it needs to be changeable. So what I do is I use my flat wonky brush. I'll make it a bit bigger because this is huge. Usually I'm using it on just a person here, and I use this purple here because when you look at photos or just anything with heavy highlights and shade, you'll notice that warm lights like the sun leave a cool shadow, and cool lights like fluorescent lights or what have you um, leave a warm shadow. So this purple is kind of in between. It's not too warm, not too cold. It's kind of neutral. So let's just go back a little bit to get rid of all of that. And then so this is on a layer that's set to multiply, and I tend to do this same process each time now, but that's just what's convenient for me. You can figure out your own way of doing it that makes sense to you, which is, for me, just going over with a thick, bold shadow, getting it in roughly the right areas of where it needs to be, hitting some dark areas, and I'll go in with more detail later and neaten things quite right. So I always do it uniform, so you can see here on Louise and on the door, in fact, uh, the light's coming from this direction and the shade is on these sides. Which I don't need there, but I do. It's a little bit coming down here. And that's just so that when you use my tokens, they all kind of match. They all look like they belong in the same space. Instead of like, when you see bad green screen and you can tell that the foreground and the background are lit entirely differently. That's what I kind of don't want to happen. Which is inevitable if you end up facing tokens a different way or spinning them around or what have you, but as a base, I want them at least to kind of match. Starts from there at least. So I'm not sure what else I can tell you about this process, because really it's just a lot of work. You just have to get down to it and fill in all the areas. I'm not worried about going outside the lines here. Just put a mask on, so you don't want to spend time lining things up when you don't have to. Enough to be getting on with without making extra work for yourself. That's why I also am a big advocate of using actions. I did make an action in one of the earlier videos, so hopefully you know how to do that with this. If you don't, just leave a comment and I'll do a little video sometime on what actions I do use to save time. Chonking along a little bit slowly. Doesn't like it when I shade and record a video at the same time. Fix that at some point in the future, but not today, so you'll just have to bear with me going a little bit slow. And as you can see, I'm not worried about entirely filling it. I could do, but especially with how slowly it's going, unfortunately, priority, because we will blend this a little bit. done. Unsatisfactory chimney pots on the top. I could do it with like a real hard edge for the shading, but I choose not to. One, because it's quite a lot more work, because you have to be a lot more precise. So skip over that, but it also means that it can be kind of near enough for whatever you want to use it for. Speed this up a little bit by putting down a big patch of this shade. Going to be a bit uniform compared to the rest of it, but just because it's going so slowly, speed up the process a little bit. Fill that. Okay, now to stop that from distracting, I'm going to control click on this cottage, which means it's selected all of the outline of that. Select my group of shading and add a mask. So now it's got rid of all those edges. So go back to here. I'm going to use my smudge tool with something like this softer wet blender. I'll make it a little larger again. Just blend in. It looks a bit weird because it's so purple, but when it all comes together, it starts to make a bit more sense. Soften up these edges. Some of these bits that might get filled in properly. I think because it's such a big area, I might end up fading shadow, but we'll see. For them now, I'll leave it as it is, and that can come later. Soften these ones as well. Quite as harsh an edge. This one is kind of a harsh edge because it's a definite stop between this side and this side, so I'll leave that as is. This would be in shadow under here, quite deep because this comes out quite a way. So match this up on this side as well. Just go completely wonky. There we go. Again, soften that because it's a little bit more scope for the imagination, maybe. Okay. Top layer isn't in shadow, so we'll remove that and soften this bit because this is kind of fat and fuzzy as well, so it wouldn't be throwing a hard shadow. Okay, so already that looks better than it was. That's without, that's with. It makes a big impact. Let's fix up what's going on over here. Just gently smudge this. This is all, you can probably tell that I'm using a tablet to draw. The pressure sensitivity makes a big difference when you're smudging things. If I was to use the mouse, not as fun. So yeah, a pressure tablet, a pressure sensitive tablet, I should say. I, for many, many years, have just used an old Intuos Wacom tablet, which works fine. Very recently upgraded to a screen tablet, which I love, but you don't have to splash out. You can get the job done without that easily enough. I'm going to just take a, this would be catching the light, so I'm just going to detail. As you can see as well, this is another important point, I think, is that I do my drawings huge. That's because I spent many, many years doing illustration for print, and it's not a habit that I've managed to kick yet. I always think, well, what if I want to print it one day? It needs to be print size, which means this would take a lot less time for you because if it was at this size, only needs to do a few brush strokes to get all the shading on. So there, that already looks better. I'm going to add some shading into this. Let's multiply. I've done it on a new layer because I'm not entirely sure how I want this to work out. I've not shaded a thatch roof before, so I feel like it should have a little bit of texture. It wouldn't just be solid. This is almost like plywood. So I want to shade as if, there's a bit of texture to it, which, the texture itself is doing half of that work, but just trying to make it look like a solid object. I added these little seams while you weren't looking. Don't worry about it, it's fine. It's just something I noticed in some of my reference materials, and I thought it broke up the huge block of solid color a little bit. It's gone over the lines. Okay, let's go back to this. Just a little touch like this all over, and then I'm going to put it in. To make it really quite soft. It's not harsh lines at all, or strong shadows. Maybe a little bit in here. I have to think how much sun this angle would catch. So I've made it as if there's a curve here, basically. So I think maybe it would have a little bit of shade. To blend it in. And that's a lot of what all of this is about. It's just adding until you don't think. And also just practice. Getting an eye for it, looking at references, which I kind of should be doing here, but that's fine. We can get away with it as long as it looks okay to the eye. Well, doesn't usually lag out so much like this, especially because it's a file size. But yeah, I think that's adding a little bit of depth to it. I quite like this actually. And, it's always worth trying because you can always just get rid of the layer if you decide you don't like it. But I think that adds a little bit of something to it, a little bit of painterly, kind of looks watercolor, which I like, especially for this cottage because, picturesque cottage and being painterly goes together. Okay, so what I'm considering now is if I just from here, now I've explained all this to you, just speed the video up. Guess it depends what comes next, how long it's going to take. Because next is the detail, so I'm going to go around basically everything and put in some more intense shadows in places where there would definitely be solid defined shadows, which might take a while, so let's have a look. Switch my brush to my detail brush, go to my detail layer. I'm going to merge this in with the one below because I think it worked, so I'm happy with it. Go to my detail layer. Let's go. let's see. That was the detail. Let's move on to the highlights. I use a light, I don't use white. I use a light, kind of a cream color, I guess. Very pale yellow. And I use the same brush as I do for the base shading, which is just a zoom in so you can see what it actually looks like. It's just a rough, smudgy, smooth kind of brush. But because, again, it's a big file, I'll use a big version of it. Get rid of that. And we're just going to put the highlights where the sun would catch the most. So along the top here, it should be noted that I will make this more see-through. I'll probably change it to soft light and also tool on it again to the soft kind of painterly feel, but it's harder to see where I have added highlights if I'm doing it subtle to begin with. So bold and then take it back, so then you can see what you've done, see what you need to do. So I'm going to add try and reflect this. What's going on down here with the shading, up here with the lights. I think it would probably catch the ridge of this, and this whole side would be quite bright, but this is just catching edges of the sunlight as it comes in from this direction. Maybe I'll speed this up again now because it's just going to be the same again where I blend all of this in, and then I'll add the fine detail in the shading, and I'll just add some extra highlights onto it. Okay, moving on to these last two layers, which I don't always use, but they often add a little something. So the white layer is for things that are super reflective, like the windows, but they've already been shaded, so I'm not sure I need to add super white highlight to it, but I will, just to show you what that layer is for. Maybe I'll knock it back a little bit, but often it's just for like highlights on armor and things like that, where something really shiny. So you could have it on the metal, but iron doesn't really shine like that usually. So instead we'll go to the blue, which I use as the reflective light. So if the light coming, I'm again pointing at my screen, that's not helpful for you. If the light is coming from this way, it'll hit what's over here and bounce back. And also just the sky itself does it. So this is kind of a weird mishmash because I don't know what's going to be here to know what color would be reflected onto the house. So instead I just use a blue sky blue kind of thing, and add in a few. It's not the right brush. Let's use brush. And I just go around the edges a little bit. It was the right brush, it's just because it's such a big image. And just pick up where some reflected highlights might strike, and it makes it feel just a little bit more depth. It's flat. Rarely, if ever, get just one source of light going on. Don't think I'm going to do it in this much detail. I'll just stick to this edge. Subtle little extra, and again, it won't be staying this bright blue, just this bright to help me done and what I haven't done at distance and easily. Everything's in place, I'll knock it back to about 30% opacity. Again, it just adds just a little bit more depth, which is what you're looking for. Bounce light coming up onto here. Also, it just helps define some edges where they might get lost in shadow otherwise. See that if you ever look at lighting in headshots and photography, you'll see especially for men, they tend to have a main light and then a rim light and that kind of thing. So look at how people light faces. There's quite a lot of rules going on in there. Can carry over to things like this now. Add anything else? I'm not sure I really do. I think I can just stay like this. Okay, so that down. You can see without it, this area looks a lot flatter. With it, you can see the chimney stands out a little bit more. And yeah, just has a little bit of extra something. So let's go back. This is how it was before we shaded. This is how it is now. So now it has some depth, it feels solid, looks like, you know, someone could live in there. Okay, so now that this is done, I think what I'm going to do is save this up and place it on a map and build a map around it using some of our other textures and little bits and pieces to make it look a bit more interesting. Okay, so I hope that taught you something. Hope you learned something, or it confirmed that your own way you already do is better, or gave you some ideas of what you can do instead. And yeah, I'll see you in the next video.